Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
What is the scariest movie you have ever seen? I'm glad Prey proved people wrong. Remember when the first teaser for Prey was released? And when the not racist social media mob saw it starred a woman of color, they cried about it being unrealistic, which in and of itself is hilarious, cause when has Predator ever been about realism? They were so quick to call it another piece of woke propaganda from Hollywood, but now that it's out and being received well from both fans and critics, suddenly those people who were hating it a month ago are nowhere to be found. It's almost as if these critics jumped the gun and now can't monetize the internet rage because there is none. It's almost like these guys saw a Native American woman in the lead role and immediately assumed it was going to be bad based on that alone. Most importantly, it's almost like these guys have absolutely no idea what they're talking about and are just complete bigots. Ha! The Minister's found footage scenes have the scariest soundtrack I've ever heard in any movie. Just these disturbing filtered grainy moans over the crackle of static really hit a nerve unlike anything I've ever heard. And that combined with the disturbing nature of the found footage tapes depicting families being murdered in brutal gory ways actually makes you think you're watching legitimate snuff films cursed by some demon, which I guess is the point. The rest of the movie is pretty standard horror fare, but those scenes in particular still terrify me. The only other movies that really disturbed me are Antichrist, The Blair Witch Project, and The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There's a lot of other horror movies I love, but none of them come close to building up a level of dread as palpable and ever-present as those do. I was a resident assistant in college, a few years ago. We have to be in the dorms during RA training, about 10 days before the students arrive. My dorms were about 4 floors, with 80 rooms on each floor. In the common room on the ground floor, there was a flat-screen TV. Me and a couple of co-workers of mine got let out early, probably 7 p.m., from training. We drove to Walmart to grab some supplies and went trawling for a cheap movie to watch that night. Lo and behold, it follows. $10. No question, I have heard wonderful things. Even the I hated horror movies, I was willing to give it a shot with my new friends. We got back to the dorm that night and threw that bad boy on around 9 to 10 p.m., when it was dark. We sat through that whole movie, absolutely terrified. That scene with the tall guy had us all screaming in sheer terror. On each floor of my dorm, you have 2 RAs, on opposite sides of the building, in different wings. So, when the movie was over, around midnight, we all said our goodbyes and walked back to our individual rooms, through the dark and empty building. The janitorial staff was behind in getting the students' rooms ready, so they had to keep all the doors of each room open, so they could easily move beds and furniture in and out as needed before the students arrived. My room was at the very end of the hall, next to a tall window set in the far wall. So, there I was, hitting bricks after my first bona fide horror movie, walking down a straight hallway, watching my reflection in the window at the end of the hall. Room after empty room passed me, with doors wide open, letting the light from the hallway spill onto hard tile floors. The building was ancient, so the heaters still rattled and groaned all around me. I walked normally at first, then a bit faster, until I was sprinting at full speed down the hallway, slamming my key card into my door and punching my code in. I leapt into the room, turned on all the lights, and leapt into bed. I've been a fan of horror movies ever since. As a child I was really destroyed by Nightmare on Elm Street. I was afraid to sleep because I thought Freddy was coming. Didn't help that I had really nightmares of him. Aliens 2. As the Queen rips Bishop? In 2 pieces. I didn't understand that he was an android and thought that white stuff is something from his intestines. Grudge also really scared me when I was 16 years old. And Dead Birds 2. The scenes with the demons and the demon son under the bed, how his face turned in a second into this grotesque thing. My friend and I screamed shortly. Don't know why. As a grown-up, the movies that really scared me were Shudder, Original, Sinister, and the IT remake. I didn't know what Sinister was. My best friend just gave me the movie and said it's better not to know anything about it. I started watching it and thought it's some kind of thriller like Seven, for example. When the son came out of the box screaming, I didn't realize it was a child or even a human. I thought it was some kind of demon or some stuff. I even paused the movie and walked through the house to calm down a bit because it was so unsuspecting. The whole movie was just creepy to me. When I watched the IT remake, it was raining just like in the movie. I was alone at home, and I watched it with my then girlfriend. I said to her after it, "It rains just like in the film." I brought her home. Went home myself and it was darkened by the sound of the rain, and watching out the window into the darkness I imagined Pennywise was in my garden. Also, the intro about how he lures Georgie to him and how he talks with him and kills him really scared me, and I had to think that something like this talking really happens with child rapists or some stuff. Also, how Georgie got killed. I also watch Mamani horror films and can gladly still immerse myself and be scared. But these movies really scared me the most. I remember watching The Ring a week before it had a wide release in theaters. I was at the movie theater, looking for new movies to watch on a Friday night, and saw The Ring listed as playing at 7:30 p.m. There was only one showing and had no information about it beforehand. I was pretty freaked out after I watched it and went home, only to find out my dad wasn't home. I then noticed that a chair we had in the living room for the computer desk was exactly the same as the one Samara was sitting on when Naomi Watts dreamed about her. Naturally, I said, "Hate that chair," and went into my room and tried to sleep. I eventually did, and when I got up the next morning, I thought the right thing to do was to share what I'd experienced with everyone at my job. I talked it up for the next week and got everybody excited to see it. After we all saw it, my coworkers were freaked out too, so they decided to get their friends to see it. I guess it worked like a virus after all, lol. Other movies that creep me out are Session 9, my favorite movie ever, The Blair Witch Project, Sinister, The Caller, A Tale of Two Sisters, The Mothman Prophecies, Darkness, 2002, and Fire in the Sky. Ghost Watch 1992, was broadcast on Halloween by the BBC as a joke investigation into a haunted house. I was 9, sitting there with my cousins after trick-or-treating. The family stuck it on and had a laugh till it hit the fan. It was kind of a paranormal war of the worlds type hoax. Terrified me worse than anything since. It was so scary an autistic man committed suicide, and because of the backlash BBC never broadcast it again. It's since been released on DVD. Well worth a watch, but take my advice and go blind. Don't look any up, just get a copy, stick it on and watch it as if it's supposedly live TV. I'm usually fairly good at keeping my cool during scary movies and telling myself it's just a movie or pointing out flaws to distract from the scariness a bit, but Hereditary really got to me. That's one movie I don't ever want to watch again. I went to see it in a near-empty theater with this girl I'd been talking to, and during some really bad parts, like the attic scene where they were cutting their necks with the wire and midair, she'd start laughing almost uncontrollably. It was definitely some sort of nervous laugh because she really couldn't stop. But mind you, I'm sitting there near panic attack myself and then trying to get her to relax and quiet down with that messed up stuff happening on the screen. I felt flat out scared and uncomfortable. The movie didn't last much longer, and I was hoping for some sort of successful conclusion or something to kind of wrap it up, but nope. No movie has left me feeling so uneasy/disturbed. That was my last date with that girl too. I remember watching The Ring in the cinema as a kid. That was like a disease I had to carry around after. I never had much experience with horror movies, but I remember watching Blair Witch Project, which I liked. Of course, The Ring was on a whole other level. There was a scene in the movie where the ghost grabs the hand of the protagonist, which sets her off into the sequence of like hallucinations flashbacks. It lasted like 10 seconds, and that entire sequence put in a roller coaster sensation. After the movie, on the ride back, there was a hill in the distance that I could see on the highway. That hill had only one dying tree on top, and it was the tree from the movie. I was like, why is that tree there? I always pass through this road, Why is it there now? The worst of it though was when I would try to sleep for like the next 4 months. Every time I'd sleep I'd think about school the next to distract myself and doze off. I would picture myself in the assembly waving at my friends at a distance, and then suddenly this Samara would appear behind all these kids. It was like I was watching a horror movie in my own mind every day. I would change the situation every night, but she'd still appear even in my dreams. That movie really scared me XD. See, monster/cult/killer stuff doesn't scare me at all. I suffer from sleep paralysis, so anything on screen pales in comparison. The things in movies that keep rolling around in my head are either sickness or bigger, existential stuff. The idea of my own body tearing itself apart and there's nothing I can do, or of something large-scale destroying everything around me and there's nothing I can do. It's weird to say, but a film like Deep Impact has kept me awake at night more than, say, Hereditary. I can imagine running away from a killer or monster, whereas just a giant wall of water, nope, nothing but oblivion. And on the other side, the Zelda scenes in Pet Sematary really threw me for a loop when I was a kid. While the movie sucks, this little teaser trailer for 2012 leaves a pit in my stomach more than 1,000 Halloweens. Can I just say that the scariest horror movies to me are the ones where I don't recognize a single actor? You know you are watching a movie, but the scariest ones make you forget it's just a movie and nothing ruins the immersion like an A-list celebrity. I'm not saying celebrities shouldn't make horror movies, it's just that the ones that hold my attention longer are usually the ones where I don't recognize any of the main cast. Martyrs, original, really stuck with me. It felt raw and brutal. Freddy Krueger used to terrify me as a child, but once I saw Robert Englund in another role without all the effect makeup I realized he really was just a guy. The Witch, it's mesmerizing and mental. My friend and I watch a horror movie every other week or so, and we have seen quite a few lately. But this was the one that really scared us. Actually, the only one. Most horror movies tend to have normal moments in between the madness. Moments where you get to breathe and see the normal world again. While watching The Witch, I found myself checking the plants in the room to look at something normal. It just keeps getting more disturbing in a very nuanced way. Also, the references to classic literature and archetypes makes it connect with deeper levels of understanding. It's a particularly good film. Tomorrow The Lighthouse is on the program, made by the same director. Can't wait. Insidious gave me nightmares after the fact. All of them. The Nun had some good jump scares. I liked it. Candyman, from the 90s. I watched it this decade after reading about Cabrini Green in Chicago. It was scary to me because, and you can look this up, it's very loosely based on a true story from there. I can go into detail and try to provide links if you're interested. I cannot wait for the remake to be completed. When I was a kid this terrified me. Not so much now as an adult, but hoodoo boy did it give me nightmares and I was scared of the bathroom for weeks after. Midsummer. Saw it in theaters and it's the only movie I've ever watched that I genuinely regretted watching. I think what scared and disturbed me so badly about it was how when you normally watch a horror movie you can blame the main characters for their own misfortune. Don't go and investigate the weird crying sound coming from the cabin. Just drive away. Character dies whatever, just stupid people in a horror movie. With Midsummer, however, I could not think of a single thing anyone could have done to survive in their situation. Besides not go to Sweden in the first place. And it all took place in the false safety of the light of day. Okay, hear me out, The Evil Dead. I was maybe 12, watching it on a late summer night in my dad's study. He and I were the only ones in the house, but he was on the main level watching television. Every other light in the house was off. It was a dead silent night, too. This movie scared me up. I remember being absolutely glued to the television, and then freaking trembling when I walked downstairs afterwards. I since of course watched Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness, the series, loved it all. But something about the ambience at home that night, your environment is so important to a good horror movie, and an all-around great movie, Jesus Christ. Honorable mentions, The Ring. I saw this in college with my girlfriend at the time. It was the last showing and the theater had maybe 10 people in it, so after it ended after midnight we were in this massive empty parking lot, creepy as hell. My girlfriend was totally on edge, so I decided to do some weird jerky motion like Samara did at times. She burst out crying in the parking lot. God, I felt so bad. Even Horizon hates this ship. The Strangers. These types of movies really get to me because it's so possible. Just minding your own business and some nutjob decides to torture you because you happen to be the first one they came across. That kind of completely detached, inability to rationalize, utterly helpless feeling is debilitating. So, I haven't seen this myself yet, but I desperately want to. It's called the Poughkeepsie Tapes. I've just heard it's incredibly unsettling and disturbing. Like, this is a movie you can only watch once. I watched a video about it, and just watching clips of it in that video made me so uneasy. To give a brief description about it, it's a footage mockumentary about tapes a murderer made. It just sounds so depraved it intrigues me. I'm in a similar boat where I love horror, but movies don't really scare me much anymore. That's why I want to see if this movie will get a reaction out of me. If anyone's seen it, please tell me if it was good or not, horror-wise. The Blair Witch Project. Let me explain. This movie came out in 1999. The internet was not an important thing yet and you certainly couldn't stream or download movies yet. So back then you would have to go to the movies or wait for the VHS/DVD. Or as I did, go to LAN parties and share movies there. And this is what I did. I got a gritty illegal copy of The Blair Witch Project. All I had heard about the movie before then was a short segment on CNN International. Now lost footage movies were not a thing either. In fact, I believe TBWP was the first. Or at least it kicked off the genre. So, on CNN they said that it might be real. I had just moved away from home, and I watched the movie alone in my first apartment. It was, as I said, a gritty bootleg, which only made it scarier somehow. I'll start this off by saying that my all-time favorite horror movie is 1982's The Thing. A movie that genuinely creeped/scared me though was Dead Silence. 2007. I'm not really scared by Paranormal Activity, Annabelle, or the Blair Witch type movies. I expected to go into Dead Silence with that same mindset and come out underwhelmed. That was not the case. I'm chilling in my bed while typing this and just thinking of that movie makes me wish I were born mute. I've watched and enjoyed that movie countless times since its release, yet I still have a fear of that doll possessing, appears in the dark, tongue-grabbing ghost. The movie itself isn't some genre-defining breakthrough or anything like that, but it's genuinely fun and a bit creepy. Dead Silence is the only horror movie that makes me afraid of the dark. I'll probably rewatch it tomorrow. Back in my early teens, The Exorcist and The Sixth Sense scared the living hell out of me. Especially The Sixth Sense, because it felt so real, I could barely leave the room alone afterwards, thinking there would be a ghost whispering to me from a closet or I'd walk past the kitchen and see someone standing there. It basically put the idea in my head that there were ghosts around me all the time, standing in the shadows of my room at night. Others that have really got under my skin on the first watch are Paranormal Activity, Insidious, Hereditary and The Blair Witch Project. I also remember when I was about 10 I watched The Evil Dead with my sister, with whom I've shared a lovely horror bond with since, and pretended I needed the bathroom, but I really just wanted to leave because the first possession sequence scared me so much. I think that's what began my love of horror. I knew I was scared, but I was thrilled as well, and wanted to go back for more. The most scared I've ever been watching a horror movie was more about how/where I watched it than it was about the movie itself. I watched Blair Witch for the first time while on a camping trip, set up camp, went to the theater, then went back to camp. That was crazy scary. I also watched Candyman at a friend's overnight party as a kid, and a bunch of the other kids kept going into the bathroom to say his name. As for a movie that is scary itself, I'll throw a shout out to The Descent. I like the unnerving atmosphere. In The Descent, the baddies don't even show up until halfway through the movie, and yet the claustrophobia of the caves is really tense. I have only been terrified by one movie and I saw it in theaters. The Conjuring. In my opinion, jump scares are a pretty cheap way to scare people. This movie had just a few. The rest of the movie was just eerie and uncomfortable. The story was fantastic, and I enjoyed every single second of that movie. The second movie didn't disappoint either. The Nun was by far the creepiest thing I've ever seen. Honestly, all the movies that correlate with the Conjuring movies are exactly right awesome films. Storytelling, scary music, my heart was just pumping the whole time. Another series close to this one is Insidious. I love all of their movies. The scene when his dad goes to the Shadow Realm or whatever it's called and finds the house that the family was murdered in scared the hell out of me and gives me chills as I reminisce to explain it. Those are my top movies that gave me chills and also told a professionally written story. The scary movie that affected me the most when I was a kid was Sixth Sense. There's a particular scene in the movie where the kid walks into the kitchen and sees the ghost of a wife who had slashed her wrist. IDK how it was in the movie, but in my memory it was a jump scare. The way my parents' house was designed, you had turned a corner to enter the kitchen, so whenever I would go to the kitchen at night, I would have to brace myself because in the back of my mind was the Sixth Sense scene. Whenever I turned the corner for a few months after the movie, I would always half expect to see the gruesome ghost of the lady. Hush, 2016, is a great thriller with a unique addition. It gets horror points from me for creating a paranoid feeling that I'm not paying enough attention. It's become something of a meme, but Paranormal Activity, 2007, had the same impact on me as the Blair Witch Project, but rather than being scared of the woods I was afraid of my bedroom door. The better you can suspend the critical voice in your head, the scarier it can get. The Vetch, 2015, was absolutely terrifying in that it made the black magic, witchcraft horror genre feel real and vastly believable. The pacing and tone make it the most refined and well-executed horror I've seen so far. It's pretty polarizing, but it worked for me. Lake Mungo, 2008. I'm desensitized to horror, too. I think when you watch enough of it, you unconsciously start to understand the language horror speaks, and things start becoming incredibly predictable, and predictability is the antithesis of horror. Lake Mungo was the first film I'd seen since I was a preteen that made me feel the way it did. I'm 36. I was so genuinely rattled by it that I was afraid to look up reviews and analyses on YouTube, in case one of them included that scene. That has never happened to me before. I was almost frozen in my chair. I would genuinely pay £100 per movie if they could all make me feel that same sub-rational sort of terror. People will either get something out of it, or they'll find it profoundly boring. I can totally understand why one might find it a tedious film. I was kind of bored for the first 30 minutes myself, and almost shut it off to watch something else. But man, if you have the particular sort of wiring that this film can tap into, it's easily the scariest film out there. Apart from its status as one of the scariest films I've seen, it's also a really good exploration of grief and mortality. So, if you don't get scared by it, you'll still have plenty to sink your teeth into. Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984. Seeing this movie as a kid, and rewatching it repeatedly afterwards, gave me nightmares for quite a while. It may have been cheesy, but the concept of Freddy alone is scary. It doesn't do this to me now, but I want to pay homage to the first one that scared the living hell out of me for years. The Bay, 2012. This is the one that does it for me today. I can only watch it once, I can't have it playing in the background or anything like that. The reason this one just handed down scares the living hell out of me is because the elements in that movie are the closest to real that a found footage film, or any horror film for that matter, can get to. I'm doing my best not to give any spoilers to this movie, but that's the best way I can describe why it does. The original Pet Seminary is brilliant, and extremely scary. It has a dark macabre tone through the whole film, no comic relief and literally nothing good happens to the characters whatsoever. It starts with tragic events, then gets worse, and ends horrifically. What is even better, is that the antagonist spirits actually are evil, none of this ghost trying to help you or spirit that needed closure cop-out commonly used as horror film resolutions. Here we are just dealing with good old-fashioned evil. Plus, character building side plots just add, effectively, to the sense of dread. For those who have seen it, Zelda still haunts my dreams. When I was a child, one of my earliest memories is watching A Nightmare on Elm Street with my father. I had nightmares for weeks apparently, but I just remember endless nights of being terrified of going to sleep because Freddy was going to get me. I also remember having a lot of nightmares for a while. I was like 4. I also remember this weird 80s horror called Shocker, which was about a serial killer that was put in the electric chair only he didn't die and started transferring his soul from body to body and killing people. I also remember seeing The Shining and Jack Torrance's descent into madness and alcoholism and eventually attempts at murdering his family terrified me. To this day, it is the scariest movie out there in my opinion. My dad was a sadistic person. He regularly tortured me with a Freddy Krueger costume he specifically bought to scare kids with on Halloween. For me, it's been different movies at various stages of my life. The first movie to truly scare me to my core was IT. I avoided storm drains walking home and showered backwards so I could keep an eye on the drain at all times. Despite this, I found the story strangely alluring and read the book, which just made things worse until my mom, a librarian who values books, chucked it in the trash. Preteen era was The Ring, and others have written about that, so I'll move along. It didn't help that it was set in my hometown. Recently, and I know this is a weird one, but I threw on the original Black Christmas and oh my god. I haven't been that scared by a movie in a long time. Something about the nature of the killer was so creepy. I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it, but man. I'm in my 30s but had dreams about a killer hiding in my house undetected. So scary, so good. I find home invasion movies generally are getting under my skin more than anything these days. Maybe because there is a chance it could happen. Watching it now, it's borderline comedy to me, but the original Evil Dead from 1981 messed me up. Growing up, I hung out with older cousins that loved horror movies. We never got to go to the movie theaters as kids, but for some reason, Evil Dead was the first one that they let me watch with them. I think I was around 5 at the time and the movie ruined me for at least a whole week. I didn't want to look out the car windows as I was afraid I'd see a possessed person. Couldn't go down dark hallways. Hated that "Mama's Going to Buy You a Mockingbird" song. Fast forward to today, and I love horror movies and try to go to Hollywood Horror Nights and similar Halloween events as much as possible. But if you ask me what horror movie is scary to me today? Off the top of my head, maybe It Follows. I'd have to think about this more. I'm right there with you when it comes to my love of horror. That being said, my recommendation will be a bit of a stretch in terms of the genre you're looking for. My recommendation would be Mother with Jennifer Lawrence. As a horror fan who loves the more indie psychological stuff, Mother shook me. I saw it about 2 to 3 years ago and I still think about it almost daily. It fundamentally changed what I perceive to be horror. Not because it is a horror movie, but because of what a movie can do to your sense of self and comfort. For more classic horror, I am a huge fan and advocate for Hell House LLC. The first was, in my opinion, a masterpiece. They got a little off the rails in 2 and 3 but were still fun. After that, a well-known recommendation would be V/H/S, just a great anthology. For me, it's Halloween, 1978. I mean, Michael Myers is just evil. He was 6 when he killed his sister. Unexpected. If you disregard the sequences, he chooses Laurie by chance. It's just because he really wants to kill her, and he goes over everyone to get it. He spends a lifetime hunting Lori, and on Halloween, 2018, she is already an elderly woman, tired of running away from a maniac and completely traumatized. And yet, he doesn't give up. Even if you consider the sequels, even the horrible Rob Zombie films, he is still a killing machine. He does not live in dreams like Krueger, he is not slightly supernatural like Jason. He's just evil. And obsessed. Like a stalker who came straight from hell. When I was 12, I was exposed to The Exorcism of Emily Rose. We were over at my aunt's house for Christmas and my cousins thought it was funny to watch that movie. I played on my phone the entire time and tried to not pay much attention because I had read a bit about the true story this movie was based on. I was mortified for weeks. I was horrified of the dark, horrified of going to bed, horrified of closing my eyes, horrified of turning the lights off. The night after watching it, I crawled into my parents' bed as a 12-year-old because I had never felt such fear. It took me months to get over watching this movie, and I will never watch it again. I get freaked out by movies based on true events, especially when there's a supernatural/evil aspect. It interests me too much and then I read up on it and scare myself. When I was around 10 to 11 years old in the late 70s, one of the TV channels played scary movies late Friday nights. They played The Haunting from 1963 on one of those Fridays and I watched it alone. Scared me so bad I couldn't move. I don't believe you actually see any ghosts, but you know they're there. Ironically, the next scariest I've seen was the Netflix version of that movie called The Haunting of Hill House. The floating man scene absolutely terrified me along with many others. Can't wait for season 2 called Bly Manor, I believe. You Are Not Alone, 2014, started out like an indie coming-of-age movie, so it was all the more surprising when it finally kicked off. I felt such a genuine sense of panic watching the latter half. It's nothing too out of the box, a modest home invasion film, but I think that feels closer to reality in terms of horror plots that can actually happen. That is more terrifying to me than gore. It really left me double-checking every door. The scene in Black Christmas where it's simply a shot of his eye has haunted me for the same reasons as my previous choice. There's a scene in the original version of Suspire which involves some barbed wire that really caught me off guard. It was building a false sense of hope. I knew something bad was about to happen, but I didn't think it would be that. The soundtrack also stuck with me, it really added to the creepy presence throughout. Watch Under the Shadow, it's on Netflix. It's a foreign language film and it scared me, and I'm a well-seasoned horror movie fan. Super underrated, and I found it by accident while browsing Netflix. Great storyline and keeps you on your toes. The Ritual on Netflix. Sort of like Blair Witch. A couple of friends go camping as a way to heal from one of their friends' unfortunate deaths. Doesn't go as planned, obviously. I loved it. Devil's Pass on Netflix. Found footage and really scary. Based on the real Dyatlov incident. I make it a tradition to watch it before camping. Also, all V/H/S movies, except the last one, we don't talk about that one, are somewhat of a found footage type. It experiments with different horror movie tropes that can be hits or missed, but it's great. Also, Vast of Night on Prime. It's not exactly horror, but it's based on a true event of an Udo that hovered over multiple small towns back in the 60-50s, I believe. Really small budget, but it scared me because it does an excellent job of immersing you into the story. The Thing, 2011. It's a prequel to the 1982 version, and while I like the old one more, the second one does a really excellent job with suspense, and some of the effects with the newer technology are really off-putting, so it will leave you a little shaken up. The plot of the older one is better, even if it's not as scary. Plus, the special effects they were able to do without much CGI are incredibly impressive, so make sure you watch both. If you haven't seen them, I suggest watching the new one first. Otherwise, you'll end up wanting to pick apart plot holes that don't necessarily add up with the old one. Great movies though. Fun fact, according to the internet, the 1982 movie was not at all well received by audiences in theaters, felt it was far too gory. Wanna see something really scary? The Blair Witch Project. I saw it in theaters, and I knew it wasn't real. I like to go into movies fresh, so I knew nothing about it, only it was scaring people. All during the movie I was conjuring up all kinds of horrible horror movie that could be out in those woods, and I ended up freaking myself out. I couldn't take a shower without feeling like something was going to bust in and get me. The Fourth Kind. That movie was scary to me because a nightmare of mine is seeing something that others can't see and trying to get help from others and they won't wake up. That's horrifying. It Follows. That movie got me. I wasn't overly scared during the movie, but when I was leaving the movie theater, this woman got off an elevator as I was getting on a different one, but she was walking slowly with a blank face right toward my elevator door. It closed before she reached it. Then I started thinking it could be anyone. I couldn't be in an unlocked room for like a week after that. I am a horror movie fanatic and I love to be scared, so when a movie does it, bravo, no matter what others think of it. Hereditary. But also, the old Halloween movies. Although the quality sucked, the movies scared me enough that I had nightmares of Michael Myers corning after me. It was so weird. I saw the first Halloween on a Sunday night, and that night I dreamt that he was coming after me. The next night, I had the same exact dream, only this time he got a bit closer. Next night, same thing, I dreamt the same dream for 7 straight days, and he was getting progressively closer each night until the final night when he picked me up with one hand and was staring into my eyes. OMG, I remember trying to stay up every night that week to avoid seeing that man. I was falling asleep in my high school classes and didn't have energy through the day. All because of him. That's why it has a special place in my life for horror. That's a tough one because I start watching a scary movie until I find a new one. The first one that actually kept me up nights was Mothman Prophecies. The scariest parts are the ones where it doesn't show anything. Lets you use your imagination to fill in the scariest parts. After that is Lake Mungo. Most slow burn movies are not my style. That thing one kept me out of the dark for a while. I was out trying to get a picture of a blood moon, but a scene from Lake Mungo popped into my head and I almost ran back to my cabin. The one most recent that just creeps the hell out of me is Teredos. The kitchen table scenes made me swear at the screen. So right now, I'd say Teredos. Not movie. But Netflix's House on Haunted Hill was terrifying. I stopped watching halfway through by it was too much for me, 35M and I don't get scared, like ever. But then I started losing sleep and getting some paranoia I've never experienced before. Like checking corners before going into rooms, looking behind doors and doing a quick 180 to make sure there's nothing behind me. I thought I'd get over it, but this went on for 2 weeks. I bucked up and finished the series. Thank God there was closure at the end. Back to normal afterwards. But geez, never again. I don't think I can handle another season. This is a really hard question. But I have to go with the Blair Witch Project. It's funny 'cause I saw it when it came out at the tender age of 9, but thought it was boring and anticlimactic. Turns out I was just too young and impatient to understand and appreciate it. Rewatching it as an adult, lights out, alone. Oh man. The atmosphere in that movie is superb. The sense of disorientation as the film progresses, watching the characters literally start losing it. Just thinking about it messes with me. Then obviously once they get to Rustin Parr's house all bets are off and it's just not stop anxiety till the final frame. And that final shot is simply a great horror. It's unsettling and disturbing. The added effect of the audio of Heather screaming sounding farther away, because the audio was only recording on the camera that Heather was holding, meanwhile you are seeing the black and white shot of the camera that was originally held by Mike, is disorienting in the best way. I can't say enough about that movie honestly. And no other film has made me feel the same. Not to say there aren't others that have scared me, Hereditary, The Vetch, The Shining, Oculus, The Lodge just to name a few, but none quite on the same level. I'm a fairly horror enthusiast, so I usually can take a lot of horrible stuff, but one that destroyed me for some reason is Cure by Kiyoshi Kurosawa. It's a story about a serial killer, but he doesn't kill anyone, he makes people kill others. He's a hypnotizer, and randomly enter people's lives to, make them murder their family, and the murderers remember everything about it but couldn't stop. It's more about the aspect of losing control and the aftermath of such acts. Nothing is shown, just the last part when they wake up, and for that it just made me super scared and I couldn't finish it, really scared me. Maybe I'll put myself though at another time. The Blair Witch Project gets a lot of hate, but imagine you're a former country boy like me, and my friends, who spent a lot of time in the woods. The situation and sound design really touched some lizard brain something. One very woodsy co-worker of mine, genuine tough nut, told me it scared him, enough so that he wasn't going to rewatch, ever. I think the relevant touchpoints of the movie were getting lost, which does happen and can be anxiety-inducing until you get your bearings again, and 2, almost everyone who spends considerable time in the woods has experienced something weird, not necessarily paranormal, just off. Sorry if this was too wordy. Pre-packed legitimately made me feel uneasy going into the woods at night, since the original Blair Witch Project. Other movies that creeped me out, Paranormal Activity, I thought it was actually real the first time watching it, did not sleep at all that night. The Ring, my friend's dad managed to somehow sneak under the pull-out sofa we were sitting on and stick his hand through the opening in the middle of the 2 mattresses. My whole life flashed before my eyes, which was pretty short because I was only probably 10 at the time.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.